There's Just Something About Kansas City is brought to you in part by the generosity of our friends at the Cockrell Family Foundation, the Bergman family, and the Sherman Family Foundation. Thank you.
Welcome once again to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City. We talk about the people, places, and things that make this such a great place to live. With me today, I'm so honored to be with this guy. I've been doing all this research on Alejandro Sanchez Alvarado. He is the president and chief scientific officer of the Stowers Institute, which you're going to learn a lot about today. And I've learned so much about doing the research on you and about Jim and Virginia Stowers and just the whole thing. But welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Frank. It really is a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you today.
Yeah, and I promised I wouldn't, I won't quiz you on the Chiefs and the Royals. And
Please don't. I embarrassingly fail.
Yeah, well, in the other part of it is people are going to learn about this thing called a planaria a little bit as well. So we're all going to learn something new today. That's it. But let's just talk about the Stowers Institute. Your road to get here obviously is amazing reading as well. And then Jim and Virginia Stowers and what they've done with this, what they've done with their money, and how they continue to fund this incredible institution here, the Stowers Institute. Let's talk about you a little bit first, though.
Okay.
You're born in Caracas, Venezuela.
That is correct. Yes.
And you had to leave everything behind to come here to the United States. But talk about growing up a little bit in Caracas, Venezuela. I know your grandfather was a little bit of the influence here with the cattle ranch, correct?
Yeah. My grandpa comes from a long line of cattle ranchers in Venezuela. And I grew up, for many summers, I spent my days in my grandfather's ranch, trying to be helpful, Mostly got in trouble doing things that I shouldn't be doing or doing them wrong or what have you. But it was a transformative experience, which at the time I didn't appreciate as such. I thought that was normal, that you go, you work on a ranch, you do what you need to do there. But in retrospect, as the years advanced and I got older, I began to realize how remarkably transformative the experience of being on the plains of Venezuela, which are adjacent to the jungle of the Amazon jungle, was in my appreciation for the complexity of life on this planet and the remarkable equilibrium that exists for all things to live with each other, against each other, etc. But that was all almost a subliminal, upbringing. Right. I just did not appreciate it at the time.
When did you start thinking about molecular biology?
It happened after high school. I had a fantastic high school biology teacher that everybody was afraid of. His name was Professor Maldonado. He passed away maybe 10, 12 years ago. Maybe a little longer than that. But he had a very unorthodox way of teaching biology. As you know, most biology teachers will actually give you a lot of information you have to memorize. And, memorize all these facts, but there's no rhyme or reason as to why you have to memorize these facts. He took an extraordinarily unorthodox way to teach biology. He came into the classroom. The professor's desk was on a little podium. He slammed his hard case Samsonite briefcase on the desk to put all the classroom in silence. Everybody quiets down, sits down, opens his briefcase, and then looks at the classroom and asks the following question. I still remember it so vividly. If you had to invent a language, what's the minimum number of letters that you would need? Thinking, are we in biology? What is this? Everybody's looking around in panic, right? Because okay, we're gonna get in trouble now. I have a friend who is a psychiatrist today. His name is Néstor Arasarte. He lives in Barcelona, Spain now. He raised his hand. And Néstor said, Maldonado, the professor said, okay, what's the answer? And my friend said, 1. Okay, explain, says the professor. And Néstor said, well, take the letter A. A is one word, AA is another word, AAA is another word, and ad libitum, right? It's not the most practical language, but you can make an entire language with just one letter. And the professor said, yeah, that's correct. But in nature actually uses 4 letters. And that's how he launched into explaining to us the nucleotides that make DNA, A, C, G, and T.
Wow.
Okay, that was the first lecture. Okay, that was the first lecture.
You were in it by that time, right?
Oh, yeah, so line, hook, and sinker. I mean, line, hook, and sinker. And then this kept on going. You know, every lecture was different, but every lecture was based on this notion. Now, there was no internet back then. We're talking about the 70s now. So he would send us with these impossible homeworks that he just wanted to see how hard we tried to solve it. Mm-hmm. After he explained to us how DNA copies itself, or you know, how the structure of DNA, how it was discovered, then he set us with the following homework: how does it copy itself? Come up with a, you know, with a solution. And we all tried and failed miserably. One of my other friends, Francisco, who is now a physician, came up very close to a solution, but it was wrong. And then he launched on an explanation of how this was discovered. That's when I became a molecular biologist, because he described what people now call today the most beautiful experiment in molecular biology. And it involved 2 scientists, Messelson and Stoll. I think Messelson's still alive. Stoll passed away recently, but Messelson is at Harvard. And I can tell you stories about him, but let's focus on this one in particular. So they came up with a very, very simple experiment that allowed them to make the invisible visible. And what they did essentially was to grow some bacteria, fed them an atom that was slightly heavier than normal atoms. It was carbon-14, and then allow that carbon to be part of the metabolism of the cell such that it would use it to make DNA. Mm-hmm. And so depending on how much DNA was being incorporated, when they separated it by weight, it would either travel slower or lighter. And by just looking at a picture of a gel with 3 lines, they knew how DNA replicated.
Wow.
That's the beauty of molecular biology, is that it really allows you to see some truly invisible phenomenon that makes and sustains all of our lives, day in and day out, visible.
Yeah.
And so I was taken.
Yeah.
I mean, I was absolutely taken by that.
So you go to high school there, then did you start, I know you had to leave and you ended up at Vanderbilt.
Yep.
Okay. Wow. How tough was it to leave your home country and your family and everybody behind? Did you get much kickback from, you can't go, don't go to the United States? You know?
Yeah, and you have to remember also, I was 17.
Yeah.
And when you're 17, you are invincible and immortal and very stupid. Yeah. it's a really, really explosive combination of attributes, right? But you know, I left with the notion that I was going to come back. And I left because when I started medicine in Venezuela, I did not like it. Right. Because he was not explaining things to me. He was forcing me to memorize things. And I didn't like my teachers at the university, and my teachers didn't like me. We have an agreement, okay, that we were not going to like each other. Now, Venezuela was going through an oil boom at the time, so it was very possible for my family to support me studying abroad. Okay. And so I went and I looked at universities, and I landed in Vanderbilt because very few people there spoke Spanish. I needed to learn English, and I figured, well, if I don't learn English, I'm not going to make it.
Right. Most other people would be different. They'd go a place where they knew a lot of people spoke Spanish, so I'd fit in a lot better, but you did the exact opposite.
Right, because I felt like I already know Spanish.
Yeah.
I don't know English, and I don't know molecular biology, and I need to learn English to learn molecular biology. So I want to learn English quickly, right? So, you know, when you're young, you just think about things weird, right? And so I got a lot of flack from my colleagues and my friends because I was leaving. And Venezuela was in an upward trajectory. And we were supposed to be the generation that's going to put the country on the map in the 21st century, so forth and so on. That's how we were raised. That's what we were told from the very beginning. And then I finished my degree at Vanderbilt. I go back to Venezuela, and there's no interest in any of the stuff that I was doing, like zero. That's when I realized that, okay, this is not going to work for me. That second move was the hardest one, because at that point I knew that maybe if I go and get my PhD, I might be able to go back, but it became less and less likely.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's been a prolonged, you know, I guess, modulation of the hope of returning, to the point now where like I harbor essentially no hope of going back.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so we get up to about you start in your career, okay, and talk about a little bit about the steps before you ended up here at Stowers.
Yeah, so I finished my degree in molecular biology at Vanderbilt, went back to Venezuela for a year, came back to the US to pursue my PhD. I went to the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, and the reason why I ended up there was because there was a trainee of a very famous scientist that was working in North Carolina at the time, trying to figure out some molecular biology of DNA, that had established his lab in Cincinnati. His name is Tom Deutschman. And so I thought I could probably do my PhD with him. So I went there. I ended up joining a different lab. Tom was part of my thesis committee. And then in that lab, I began to work, believe it or not, with mouse embryonic stem cells, way before people were interested in stem cells. And we were looking at those cells as a tool to allow us to do molecular biology, to modify the genome of the mouse, to introduce mutations that were responsible for diseases in humans. And so that was my job. My job was to clone one gene, but then I got distracted. I began to grow these cells in a petri dish, and the cells began to form these little balls of cells, and they were beating spontaneously. So somehow, by chance, I managed to take these cells and turn them into cardiac tissue. And that became my thesis.
Wow.
And so trying to figure out how you can actually take an undifferentiated cell and turn it into cardiac muscle. And that's what triggered my interest in regeneration, which is what I work today.
Yeah, right. And you're talking about now the cardiac muscle. So if you have a heart attack or a stroke, now remember, I don't know what I'm talking about here, okay? So you correct me anytime I'm going down the wrong path. But just if you have a heart attack or a stroke in your heart, you lose some of your heart muscle, you lose some of the capacity for that heart to do what it's supposed to do.
That's
and this is what you were studying, is to try to how to get back to be a whole heart.
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. So we don't really understand why is it that some tissues in our body are incredibly good at repairing themselves, and others they're just slackers. They flunk. They just fail miserably at repairing themselves. The heart and the brain are two very good examples of this. But for example, our skin is constantly renewing itself.
Right.
Constantly renewing itself. It's incredibly good at this. The lining of our gut is renewing itself every 7 days. That's the surface area of a tennis court. Now imagine you own a tennis court and you have to resurface it every 7 days. It's almost like a crazy task. We do that while you and I are here laughing.
Right.
The body's doing it
like
it's nothing. No skin off its nose, no pun intended. But the bottom line is that we don't understand why is it that this is so weirdly distributed in different tissues, right? And so when I realized that it was possible to program cells to produce specific tissue types, then I thought, well, why don't we study this?
Yeah.
Right? And so from Vanderbilt, so from the University of Cincinnati, I ended up going to Baltimore. In Baltimore, I joined the Carnegie Institution for Science, the Department of Embryology. And that was actually a consequence of my PhD advisor, Jeffrey Robbins, who passed away 2 years ago, introducing me to the then director of the center in Baltimore when he came to give a seminar in Cincinnati. And so Jeff was allotted an hour with this distinguished speaker. And Jeff told me, Alejandro, I'm meeting with this person, and I want to give you my hour so you can talk to him. I said, all right, who is this guy? I had no idea who he was. I had no idea what the Carnegie was. I've never considered going to Baltimore or anything of the sort. And we sat in my PhD advisor's office, and I shared the work that I was doing with Don Brown, the director of the Carnegie. And he was a very patrician-looking individual. He didn't smile. He listened intently, asked a couple of questions, said, nice to meet you, and then I left. And I said, what the heck happened there? I had no idea. I was like, well, I guess that's done, right? 2 weeks later, I get a letter, a snail mail letter from Don Brown asking me to come visit the Carnegie. I thought, like, okay, fine. I have no idea what that was. Turns out that that was probably one of the most important, at the time, centers of research in developmental biology. And he was the man, right? But I have no idea. I'm young, stupid. Went there, gave a seminar, and then they offered me a position there, and then I moved to Baltimore.
Okay.
And I was there for about 6-7 years.
Right. And to me, it seems like you're on this path where, we were talking about this a little bit before you came here, was the fact that you are doing this research, but you just want to be left alone to do your research and not have to worry too much about immediate results,
right.
Which you're asking questions and trying to do things that may not be solved for generations.
That's right.
You and I will be gone by the time maybe you can regenerate or do some of these things that you're that you're researching now. And that's most research hospitals. Remember, correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Most research hospitals want results.
Correct.
We want, okay, where are you going to be 3 years from now? Well, we don't know because we're just researching this.
Correct.
Well, we need a result because they're trying to get funding, they're trying to do all this stuff. So I think you were down that path early, weren't you?
Yeah.
Is to try to, I just want to do the research. I'm working on something that's generational that might not happen for a long period of time. And that's a whole different scenario.
No, that's right. And I think it's because of my upbringing. I think this didn't come, in any planned way. I think this is what I mean by these subliminal messages, is that I realized that for me to feel like I really understand something, I really need to understand the genesis of that problem. And so I like to understand how ideas came about to begin with. And so that always sends you down a rabbit hole. And as you go down the rabbit hole, you realize how little we know about what we think we know.
Right.
And so if you are methodical about it, you want to fill in those holes. And then as you start filling out those holes, you realize like, oh my gosh, we have completely misinterpreted this particular phenomenon. So here's how we can tell that our appreciation of that phenomenon is wrong. So you do some experiments and you build and you build. Abraham Flexner, who was probably the main architect in the United States for the modern medical schools, would have been surprised with the way in which medical schools, as you mentioned, turn out today to be really, really utilitarian driven and produce results immediately.
Old school.
Old school. Abraham Flexner actually suggested that medical schools should not be that way. And he really built the modern medical school. He believed that science, when applied to medicine, had to be allowed to run its course, just like the Mississippi runs its course. And his argument was as follows, is that if you go to the fountainhead of the Mississippi, somewhere up there in northern United States, it's a trickle. It's a tiny little
coming
trickle.
up out from underneath a rock somewhere.
That's right. You cannot imagine building dams or having fluvial, ways for ships to try. Nothing. But he says that's what science does. You start at the base, you let it build on itself, and by the time you hit the Gulf of Mexico, it's one of the largest rivers on the planet.
Yeah.
And so if you actually protect that fountainhead and allow it to flow in its own way, it's going to yield undreamed of utility. Right. His words, not mine. And so, so that's what I think we need to not lose sight of. And so I feel that not just my work, but the work of the Institute is precisely to do just that.
Yeah.
Let's keep the focus on what we don't know. Let's feel stupid every day, so to speak, because we're dealing with, a mountain of ignorance in understanding of biological processes. But let's try to make it more understandable, start building, and there will be years from now, as you just said, possibly generations from now, enough of this knowledge gathered that will produce unimaginable. In fact, possibly things that we deem impossible today to attack a host of maladies that affect us.
Yeah, right.
But it needs to be cultivated.
Right, and so while you're doing your research there, Jim and Virginia Stowers are here in Kansas City doing their thing. Both of them are cancer survivors. Yep. Jim had prostate, and I think Virginia had breast cancer. Yep. And I think they were just terrific philanthropists, okay? I think Forbes magazine calls them the most generous couple in the entire world for what they did. Jim was very successful, even though his grandfather and father were doctors. He decided to go sell mutual funds and founded 20th Century and then American Century.
Correct, yes.
And did very, very well. But they wanted to give back and have always wanted to give back. So their idea was to found something like the Stowers Institute to attract people like you who had it in your own mind that this is what we have to do in order to cure some of these maladies that we have, whether it's Alzheimer's or it's Parkinson's or it's breast cancer or prostate cancer, whatever we have to do that. And through their philanthropy of almost $2 billion that they have that they've put into the Stowers Institute, this gives you the platform and all your collaborators the platform to do this, right?
Yep. I mean,
and so how did you hear about what was happening in Kansas City, and how was that transition?
well, I mean, the first time I heard it, to be frank with you, Frank, is I didn't believe it. It's too good to be true. This is just some sleight of hand by somebody who really wants to, aggrandize their legacy and claims that it is something or other. I was approached in 2005 for the first time, and I just said no, because I didn't believe it. I'm a fairly skeptical human being.
So did you talk to them about it?
Yeah, I will get to it because, well, two things. So I'll tell you my part, and then tell you a little bit about my experience with Jim. I think one of my biggest regrets when it comes to really understanding, what this whole effort really entails was to not spend more time talking to Jim. When I first met Jim, it was in 2009, I believe, possibly 2010. He was already not doing very well physically. His mental capacities were still there, but I was told that, they were declining, and he was aware of it. Virginia, when I first came to Kansas City to try to meet them, had fallen at the time and fractured her hip, so I couldn't meet her. But both my wife and I were being recruited. We're both scientists. And
she works with you today here.
Yeah, she works here as one of the investigators, that's correct. And right now she's in Washington, D.C. Reviewing investigators at the NIH, at the National Institute of Health, so she's busy today. But we went, he has an office in the other building across the rotunda here. And we went to meet with him because one of my conditions to sign on the dotted line is that I need to talk to the founders. Because I will not believe that this is real until and so I'm embarrassed, Frank, to be frank with you. I am embarrassed when I think about all I put these people through for them to convince me that this was what they claim it was. I'm embarrassed today. It was too much. But I think that this was the deciding moment. I've told this story before. I don't think I've ever recorded this story before, but we sit at this round table. Jim is sitting where you are. I'm sitting here. My wife is sitting over here. There's a table separating us. He's sitting, I think, in a wheelchair at the time, but comfortable. And he told us the genesis story of what inspired him to build this institute. And it was very moving, and I understood that, it was genuine. And, he got watery eyes telling all this stuff, and that, he had to go through all the skepticism he had to overcome to try to convince people they could be done in Kansas City. And then, he finishes. And me being who I am, I asked, well, that's great that you gave all this to science, but what do you want me to do? With all this. I mean, immediately, I could see why this man was a giant. This relatively, feeble-looking individual that had watery eyes, he grew in stature. He literally stood upright, or sat upright rather, clenched his fist, I'm seeing it in my head right now, and just slams the table and starts screaming, "I'm not a scientist. You are the scientist. You should not be asking me these questions. I think we made a mistake. You shouldn't be here." Like, my wife is kicking me under the table. Like, "Oh, Alejandro, shut up," And then we have this, and people came into the office because they've never heard him scream, or have not heard him scream recently. And then after he's really angry, I said, "Mr. Stowers, you have to understand, I have to ask you this question. Because whenever I meet individuals that have given a great deal of their wealth to advance something, they always want the people there, supporting to do something for them. And then say, oh, so who are these? And he didn't believe me. Who are these people? I'm not going to mention names, but he said, and I mentioned the name like, I get it now. He said, well, I am the opposite of that, okay? And so then that's when I realized that he really meant it. What he really wanted to, and our mission actually says it, is that we want to make a contribution to humanity by advancing medical research, by revealing the secrets of life.
Right.
There's no mission statement that I'm aware of that actually uses those words. And so that's when I decided that this will be the place for us to come and try to continue to pursue what I refer to as really curiosity-driven discovery research. And what I'm now more and more using the word instead of basic is foundational or fundamental research. This is where you build large edifices. So you want to make sure that the foundation is as robust and as rigorously built as possible. And that's what I think the Institute is doing today.
I also think, and correct me if I'm wrong again, but there's no tenure here.
There's no tenure.
Okay, there's no tenure here. And I think probably more than once a year, but at least once a year, you're probably brought in maybe to sit down with you or with a panel of people, and then you get asked the question, what have you done for us?
Yes, exactly.
You know, and if it doesn't come up to standards, that's when you have to have some real serious conversations with that person.
Yeah,
correct?
That's correct. So this is the virtue of the wisdom of Jim and Virginia and what they did, all the legwork that they did before they established the institution. They traveled the country and visited the most prominent and preeminent research institutions in the nation, learned what they did. And I learned recently that Jim was always very fond of asking to meet with the younger investigators, the early career investigators, and always ask them, what do you need to do your science? And he would take notes and then take that with him. The conclusion was that tenure was not going to be a way to keep people constantly active. People tend to coast. It's a human, nature.
It's a human trait.
It's a human trait. Secondly, that they spend most of their time writing grants when they spend most of their lives learning how to do science and not to write grants.
Right, and so writing grants, for all you who don't know, that you are now trying to write grants to get money in order to continue on with your research, you did not have to do that here.
That's correct. And so that consumes, on average, on a regular academic institution, about between 60 to 80% of the time of an investigator. So it's a big, 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 investment of an individual's time that has been, trained to be a scientist, but now it's just a professional grant writer, so to speak. I don't want to trivialize it. It's important, but it really is an outsized commitment of time.
Right.
And so Jim is wondering, why, and Virginia as well, why are they spending most of their time not doing science? And this was why, right? And so when they looked at all of these, the structures of how to run science, they decided that what they wanted to do was to build a building that scientists felt very happy to come in, have the resources that they need, and then be reviewed, every 6 years to tell an independent party of scientific advisors how they have or have not moved the needle in a period of time.
Advance in that period of time.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct. And there's virtue in that because it really will only attract people here that really want to get science done. They're not really looking for a career. They're really looking more for a possibility to carry out their vocation, what they really love doing, which is science. And so those who are really more interested in getting tenure and having a
Coasting
career,
home.
this is probably not the place for them.
Yeah.
It also, there's another virtue, and I think that Jim and Virginia intended that, of being able to have the institution here in Kansas City. There is a situation with institutions that, especially if they're renowned, the trapping is that by joining a well-established institution, their fame spills over into you. So it's kind of like external validation. And this is an institution that will not give you an external validation. This is an institution where the validation comes from you by doing great work. And so it really flips the tortilla around, so to speak. in that the people that we attract here, they're not looking for external validation. They're not looking for a career. They're looking to advance science.
Right.
And that is really what the pure play, vision, I think, that Jim and Virginia had for this place. And so it's very exciting. For a scientist, this is really, really, really exciting.
Yeah, and I think there is one statement there, I think, that you'll be remembered forever for what you do. You know what I mean? If all of a sudden we'd have a cure for prostate cancer, totally, breast cancer, all cancers, whatever, Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or whatever diseases of the brain that we have, if you cure this or you do the science and we can take care of this and eliminate, eradicate it forever, you'll be remembered for all your life, whether you want to be remembered or not.
Yeah.
You're going to be remembered for that.
Yeah, it's within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't know how.
But they're not looking for that.
We're not looking for that.
Right.
I mean, in fact, I'll be blunter or more blunt about it, is that we're not that interested in fame and being remembered as much as we are in contributing meaningfully to the advance of knowledge, such that these things that you mentioned, cures, can become a reality.
Right.
And so if this is not done, we're never going to overcome all these difficulties. And the reality is, Frank, that many, many people, for many, many generations, have been doing this. And we don't know who they are. But we know they're there because we have the results of their incremental knowledge that we have inherited from them that informs what we're doing. And we built on this.
Right.
So we know. So we look at this as a transgenerational effort, from the beginning of asking how does a cell divide, to today, by hundreds of thousands of minds that came together to solve this problem,
Right.
and we're just part of that.
Right.
And so, if we're lucky enough to happen to be at that point in time, an inflection that the knowledge allows to really make a tangible delivery, great. I'm very happy for my colleagues when they win a Nobel Prize, and fantastic, it was their time. But that's not why we do it. Right. In the long run, we're doing it because, like I said, it's a calling. We really want answers to these questions. And as you mentioned earlier, we know that in all likelihood, we will not get the answers to those questions in our own lifetime. But that's not enough to discourage us.
Right. We're building towards that. Yeah.
In fact, we double down.
Right.
Because we know that if it's not me, it's going to be somebody else who maybe hasn't even been born. I will never know who this person is. I don't know in what country or in what state they're going to be doing this, but it'll be there for people to do. Yeah. So that's another virtue, I think, of our institute, is that all of our research is open access.
Yeah.
Everything we do here, anybody who wants to take a look at the experiments, the results, they can look at them on the computer and repeat the experiments if they want.
Because tremendous collaboration.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And for recruitment, I think in the beginning, when Jim and Virginia Stowers decided to build this institute and do the work they're doing, didn't people sort of discourage them and say, you should be on the East Coast or the West Coast? Yes. What are you doing in Kansas City, right? And they refused to listen to anybody because they knew this was the right place. Yeah. On the other hand of that, trying to recruit people from the coast becomes a little bit more difficult for Stowers Institute.
Yeah. But it's difficult. I mean, the pool...
Because I was going to say, the pool has to be extremely small, and there's a lot of competition.
That's right. There's a lot of competition, and you have to remember, I mean, we're barely 25 years old.
Right.
Stanford, Harvard, MIT, they've been around. They've been around for decades. And so they have a reputation of excellence. They have the data to support that reputation. And so, of course, it is going to be very difficult to convince people that they should not go to those places when they have an opportunity to go to those places.
You probably had the same pool, right? Yep. Somebody else, you came here and asked the hard questions, but you probably knew, well, if this doesn't work, I can go to Harvard, or I can go to Princeton, or I can go to MIT, or whatever else, right?
That's exactly right. I think all of our investigators, if it came to that, they would probably land in any of those places, to be frank. In fact, two of our new investigators were actually being recruited by other institutions when we were recruiting them to come here. And here's the beauty of the system. When they come here and they realize that most of their time is going to be dedicated to their craft, and there is no BS, that's really what they're going to be doing, and they're going to be supported, and that if they, or when they actually advance the needle, there's support for another 7 years and another 7 years. You're looking at potentially a runway of uninterrupted work for 21 years. That is unheard of, okay, in academia. So if the individual is intellectually mature enough, sufficiently confident that does not need the external validation that is given to them by these famous institutions, and they can picture themselves working in this place, then we get them.
Right.
It's a no-brainer. And here's the best part, Frank, which I didn't appreciate when I first moved here. Kansas City. I'm not kidding you, man. Kansas City, this is a wonderful place to live. I mean, I live minutes from here. I have a fantastic museum across the street. You know, downtown is vibrant. The people are welcoming. And so compare that to LA. Compare that to Boston.
There is no comparison. Okay.
It's no traffic. I mean, the traffic we complain about is embarrassing, to be frank with you. It's not traffic by comparison, but it is a really interesting situation where the work is not only fascinating, but the place where you can actually live and raise your families and so forth allows you to spend most of your time on the things that matter.
Yeah.
In the case of us, will be science, and if you have a family, your family. Everything else is potentially a distraction.
Right.
And so it's a brilliant thing.
And I think once you get people here, and I've talked to other people about this, once you get people here and they're here for a period of time, they understand and they really don't want to go anywhere else. They'd rather stay here, right?
Yep. And then, you know, it's this sense of relief every time I land at the airport, like, oh, I'm back home. You know, it's just like, I just came back from New York. It's like, I can't leave there, man. It's crazy, right? And so, but there is really a combination of factors that I think in the long run are going to also shape the way we do science here. Because I think things are a product of their environment as much as they are a product of the people who do it. But if you have, you know, scientists who are not worried about, you know, how their families are going to fare, if they're not worried about, you know, where is the resource going to come for me to do this experiment, and they can now really focus on their responsibilities to their family and their responsibilities to themselves as scientists, is actually going to produce a type of science that is going to be distinguishable from the science that's being produced in those other places.
Right.
So I think that in the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be a brand of science that is essentially, if not invented, produced in spades here at the Stowers Institute,
right,
in Kansas City, Missouri, in the middle of the country.
Wow.
You know, where people don't expect these things to happen. But that's I think that's the secret sauce.
Yeah.
They don't expect much from us. And then they get really hit up the head hard.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And you do recruit younger people, and you have educational system here as well. It is a teaching institute.
Yes.
So are you finding it a little bit easier to get people here since you've been established for a period of time? Not as long as a lot of these other places, but it's established and people understand.
No, I mean, really, there's a strong foundation at the Institute, and we definitely benefit from that. Yeah. And so we don't find ourselves explaining the Institute as much to these recruits as we used to when we were not even mentioned in conversations of where do you go to get your PhD and so forth.
Right, and the other thing is too, you have people here from all over the world.
That's right.
That's the thing I mean, you're from Venezuela.
Yeah.
And you have people just, this is a melting pot.
It really
of
is.
the world here at the
really
Stowers
is.
Institute.
And the common denominator is curiosity. It's this love of solving biological problems. And so what I really like about the Institute is that, you know, you could come from France, you could come from Japan, you could come from China, South America, anywhere, and you can put them all in the same room and they'll be talking about the same thing.
Right.
Irrespective of what your upbringings and your, you know, cultural, you know, heritage and sometimes baggage may or may not be, you know, it's still all of those actually come together in really magical ways, because two people who are raised differently will look at the same object and they'll describe something different from that, which makes the description of that object much more complete than if you only saw one perspective. And that's what I mean. So if we can actually bring all of this together, we're going to see problems in ways that very few people see.
Yeah, right.
And that means potential solutions to that problem.
Yeah.
Right?
In making this such a welcoming place as well, not just the building itself, but Kansas City as well. It really helps to keep them, because people like you, when you left Venezuela and the second time, you knew you were probably leaving for good and coming here. That's not easy to do.
Nope.
I mean, people get homesick, people have families in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to give them some reason to, okay, you do your science here, we do that, and you can get home and you can visit and then come back. And,
I mean, it has to be meaningful, Frank.
Yes, right.
I mean, it's just not, it cannot be transactional. Because transactional you can do anywhere. But meaningful work is not in every corner. I mean, you have to find and you have to cultivate the ecosystem that allows for a meaningful work to blossom, to yield fruit. And that's a huge amount of work that requires a great deal of dedication, a great deal of discipline, and that's what we essentially inherited from our founders.
Right.
That's what they wanted.
Right.
We want to create an ecosystem where these things thrive, where people come and they feel that they're doing something meaningful.
Right.
I mean, contribute to humankind. That is the first sentence of our mission.
Right.
I'm sorry. I mean, that's pretty tall order, right?
That is
so.
Really tall,
I mean, we take it seriously, right? And so I agree with you. It's just the fact that many people come here and enjoy their time here is because they're not going through the motions. They feel that they're really part of something that is bigger than them. And I feel myself that way. And that really allows you to really think very, very long term, as opposed to like, well, what am I going to do tomorrow? Or short term, how am I going to benefit between now and next week? No, it's just really, really long term.
Right.
And creates an entirely different level of discussion. Right.
And where are we with some of those things? Are we, just to be, general knowledge of stuff, where are we with some of the things with Alzheimer's? And you feel good about where the research is going and how much progress you're making in certain things like that? And regeneration. We're talking about stem cells maybe to spinal cord injury from an automobile accident or something.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be, we don't want it to be permanent. We want to be able to get you back on your feet and become a productive human being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always feel that we can always do better, that we can always have more progress. So I'm always very tentative to say that we're making progress. We are, objectively speaking, but are we making enough progress? And that we are essentially constrained by our lack of knowledge of the problem, right? And so we have to invest in trying to get that done. But that being said, I do feel that, and I also know objectively, that some of the information we're beginning to glean from these problems and some of the understanding that we're beginning to derive from these problems is really moving our understanding of these diseases in the right direction. Good example is our scientific director, Kao 6C. He's a very good example of what the Stowers can do. He's been here for 20-some years, right? I don't think he would have succeeded anywhere else because his question took essentially 20 years to answer. He wanted to know essentially how these molecules, collections of molecules that come together inside of your neurons of your brain and come out of solution and form these plaques, you really form. And these plaques are normally associated with diseases like Alzheimer's, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Parkinson's, etc.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Parkinson.
All of these things, when they look at the deceased individuals, their neurons, their nerve cells have these plaques in them. Now, a normal person, okay, would have said, okay, how can I cure the disease?
Right. How can I wipe those plaques out?
That's right. But a scientist, a true scientist would actually not ask that question. That person would ask, how are memories formed to begin with? Because the major concern from Alzheimer's is that you lose everything you are. You lose memories, you lose recollection of your personality. And so how do you build something that ultimately you're going to lose? So if we don't know how we build those, good luck fixing it, right? And so Kelsey decided, I'm going to find out how memories are formed. And in the process, and sustain through time, and through the process of doing that, discover that these proteins that form plaques are actually necessary to form memories. which suggests that not all plaques are bad.
Right.
And our treatment assumes that they're all bad. So we try to wipe them out. And you know how many treatments for Alzheimer's we have today? 0. Okay? Right. And it's not by lack of trying, Frank. I mean, there's dozens of clinical trials, thousands of manuscripts, scientific papers have been written on trying to solve this out. And we're not near close solving this problem. Yeah. But then knowing that these plaques are actually important, and that you and I are going to remember this conversation through the formation of some plaques in our neurons, okay? It's really, really important, right? And so I do feel that, these kinds of discoveries, as they percolate through the scientific community and through the medical research community, they'll begin to make waves, and people will begin to build on that, and then eventually things will emerge.
How much are you integrating AI, this artificial intelligence at this point?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, in fact, one of our investigators, Juliet Salinger, originally from Germany, she was one of the first investigators at the Institute to see the value of artificial intelligence to the work that we're doing here. And this happened maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, before it really was in the colloquial parlance now that everybody talks about AI. What she recognized is that computers are very good, and particularly these large language models, these machine learning models, to recognize patterns. And all they needed to do was to teach the machine to speak a specific biological language. In this case, the nucleotides, the elements of DNA. And she found a way to train computers to identify regions of our DNA that are important for regulating gene expression, okay? And so that's at that level. We use AI in my lab we teach the machine how to look for patterns in photograph taken with the electron microscope, okay? And now we feed it thousands of these images, and it'll actually point out where they are, so I don't have to do it by hand. Saves us huge amounts of human hours in this process. We're also using artificial intelligence to help us design proteins that we intend to target for manipulation to see whether or not they play a role in a particular situation. And the uses keep on.
Right, just keep coming.
Just coming. And so we look at it as another enabling technology, just like the electron microscope, just like the PCR reaction, just like CRISPR-Cas9, all of this technology, we look at it as just another method that is going to augment our capacity to interrogate the unknown with larger precision, with more precision rather, and with larger scope. Right. Because it really allows us to do many, many things simultaneously. We don't have to do them in series. We can now run them in parallel, right, which you couldn't do before.
Yeah, right, and it'll cut down the period of time that maybe we can find something.
Exactly.
At the end, and that's the most important
That's
thing.
Exactly right.
Let's talk about you for a minute. Let's talk about Tatiana and the kids. Tell me a little bit about the family now. Okay, you're getting back down to my level now. Now I'm starting to come down a little bit, okay?
No, that's also a favorite topic of conversation for me. Yeah, no, we're doing well. I mean, this is, our daughter graduated from college earlier this year.
Where'd she go?
She went to UVA.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. University of Virginia.
That's right. She studied architecture and design. And she's now living in New York, working for a firm there. Our son is teaching, I guess, elementary, primary school in Bend, Oregon. And
it's a beautiful spot.
Yeah, I mean, but as you can see.
Yeah, you have good places to visit. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Well, but they're doing great. And frankly, they call Kansas City their hometown. Mm-hmm. They call Kansas City their hometown, even though Sebastian was born in Baltimore, and Annika was born in Utah, in Salt Lake. But when you ask them where they're from, they'll say Kansas City. Yeah.
And you and Tatiana aren't going anywhere, right? We've got you.
As far as I can tell, my friend, I think this is the place where we feel that we can be the most useful. Yeah. And the most, I guess. Useful is the right word for me. Yeah. Where we can probably do something that we would not be able to do anywhere else.
Right.
That's rare, Frank. I have to tell you, that's a really rare thing. Right. I don't say very much because I don't want to sound like like boasting, but You know, I don't think we get a lot of opportunities as scientists to have an opportunity like this, redundantly said. But it's great when you can do your science. It's great when you can contribute to your field. It's an entirely, altogether different thing when you can actually contribute to the larger enterprise in a way that is going to hopefully lift as many, many more boats that you could if you were just doing your own thing. So
it's happening here in Kansas City.
Yeah, and it's happening here in Kansas
which is
City.
phenomenal. You probably never thought. You probably had no idea where it was.
No, Frank, if by some, you know, sleight of magic, you would have shown up on the plains of Venezuela when I was so, hey, Alejandro, we're going to be interviewing you in Kansas City sometime in like 2024. I would say, like, okay, what did I drink today?
Where's Kansas City?
No, I mean, the likelihood of all of this, I mean, the fact that there's a Stowers Institute, the fact that Jim and Virginia met, the fact that Jim decided not to go to medicine and go into finance, all of this is so unlikely, right? It's so unbelievably unlikely that after it happens, we really need to appreciate what it is for what it happened, because these probabilities of being a reality were so slim to none. But here it is, right? So what are we going to do with it?
That's right.
What are we going to do with it? So it's
and I think they're both looking down and they're both saying you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And
well,
Jim will be going, quit talking to Frank and get back to work, okay? Because I'm tired of saying I've heard these stories before. So that's it. But Alejandro, thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are, and best of luck to you and your family as well.
Thank you very
and
much.
We're certainly glad to have you in Kansas City because, as we always say, there's just something about Kansas City.
I greatly appreciate your time, Frank, and thank you for doing this as well.
Yeah, you
I enjoy it very much.
Thank you so much.
There's Just Something About Kansas City is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization with the mission of documenting the stories that have built our city to inspire and educate generations to come. Our work is made possible by the generous support of local partners such as the Cockrell Family Foundation, the Bergman family, and the Sherman Family Foundation. For more information about how you can help us share these stories, visit our website at somethingaboutKC.org. Thank you.